So getting into the 3 M's, again, those were marksmanship, manipulation, and movement. So each of those M's have their own set of criteria underneath them that are important to pay attention to. If you guys have already watched my self-defense pistol fundamentals video, this is going to sound very familiar, at least for the marksmanship portion of this discussion. If you haven't watched that video, I recommend you go watch it. You don't necessarily have to stop this video to go do it. It's just some really good context in that video. So the first thing when it comes to marksmanship is grip. And that's how are you gripping and interfacing with the rifle. One school of thought or one rule of thumb, you always want to make sure that you're gripping the rifle with your fighting dominant hand. For me, that's right-handed. And then everything else that I need to do with the rifle is going to be done with my support hand. We'll talk about that more in a little bit when we start talking about manipulation. So something to think about. With a rifle, you have 4 points of contact on the gun versus 2 points of contact with a pistol. With the pistol, you have your right hand and your left hand. That's all you got. So everything else that you do with the pistol for marksmanship, all of those other fundamentals are very important, especially just the grip and the grip pressure and how you're integrating with that pistol. Rifles are a little bit more forgiving. So you have your pistol grip and you have your support hand grip. You have the stock, and then you have your cheek weld. You have 4 points of reference on that rifle to be able to utilize it, which is really kind of nice as far as having the best biomechanical connection to the firearm as possible. It's a lot easier to have a really solid biomechanical connection to the firearm if it is a rifle versus a pistol. The next thing is stance. Now, I'm going to briefly talk about stance because stance is only moderately important. So you want to have an athletic posture. You're going to be on the balls of your feet. You're going to have a slight bend in your knees. Maybe your support foot or your non-dominant foot will be slightly ahead of your right foot. Well, slightly ahead of your dominant foot. You're going to have a slight bend forward in the hips. You're going to have good posture. You're going to tighten up the muscles in your core. And then you're going to essentially mount the rifle. So that's a good athletic stance. And the reason why it's important for it to be athletic is twofold. Thing one, or reason number one, when you are forced to shoot in a standing, kind of a static environment, that good stance is going to best transfer the recoil from the rifle to the shoulder, through your spinal structure, through your lower body and into the ground. It's going to be the best conductor of that energy because that energy has to go somewhere. What we don't want is for that energy to go through your shoulder and tip your hips back or tip your upper body back. What that does is it throws off your sight alignment and it makes repeated shots very difficult. So you need to have like a good kind of a forward arching posture with the muscles in your abdominal region tensed up to help support that skeletal structure. The other reason why having a good athletic stance is important is because you need to move, all right? You cannot stand static in a gunfight. That is very, very dangerous. We're going to get into that more in a little bit when we start talking about the movement aspects of this. But having a good athletic stance is important because you might need to do athlete-related things when you have to use this rifle. All right. Next thing I'll talk about is sights. And before we dig real deep into sights, we'll talk about sight selection. So on this fighting rifle, for instance, I have my iron sights by use of the carry handle. There's a little hole drilled through the bottom of the ACOG because this is meant to mount in a carry handle. Essentially, if I compress my cheek down, I can actually look through my iron sights and use my iron sights as a backup without having to flip anything up or blah, blah, blah. It's just there. But for normal aspects, I can just use that mini ACOG just by kind of like tipping my cheek up. So right now I'm looking through the iron sights, tip my cheek up just a smidge, and I am behind the ACOG. Pretty nifty. It's very important to select optics that work best for your eyes. Some people have trouble with just a plain red dot, like an aim point or something like that. If people have like an astigmatism, that aim point can kind of blossom out and kind of go from being like a little dot to like a little star. I don't struggle with that, so I don't know what that affliction is like, but I understand it. That's one of the things that is nice about like an etched reticle like this ACOG. This is a circle dot reticle, very, very crisp, very easy to see, very clean. I really like that for doing precision shots. This optic has actually been through 4 tactical games. This optic used to sit on my BCM, and that's been through 4 tactical games, and it's been very good. I've been able to outshoot dudes with LPVOs with that optic just because the reticle is so clear. And marksmanship has a whole lot more to do with the shooter versus the gun. The gun and the technology and the optics, that certainly helps. And I'm not saying this to like toot my own horn. I'm just saying like skills are more important than hardware, but it is nice to have a very, very fine aiming reticle, especially when shooting at distance. So when you're talking about your sights, something else that I wanted to put into that conversation is your zero. So I really like to run a 36-yard zero. So these 2 rifles in the center are on a 36-yard zero, both the irons and the optical aiming solution. All of that is on a 36-yard zero. My 300 blackout, I just have it on a plain old 25-yard zero. Just because I don't really intend to shoot it a whole lot further than that. But yeah, that's on a 25-yard zero there, especially because ballistically, the 36-yard zero is more for a 5.56. It's not really designed for a 300 blackout. My ACOG setup over here at my BCM, the ACOG itself, I have zeroed at 100 yards so that I can utilize the ballistics that are baked into the reticle on the ACOG, the TA31 RCO. And then my SRO up here is defaulted to a 36-yard zero. One thing that I really like about the 36-yard zero, I actually learned about it quite a few years ago from Sean Ryan, before Sean Ryan was a podcaster. He was just like, you know, another ex-team guy / former CIA contractor that, you know, talked about a bunch of gun stuff. And he really advocated for the 36-yard zero, which kind of prompted me to change to that. Anyways, one of the reasons why I really like the 36-yard zero is, like, let's say the center hole of the CD is like your point of aim, point of impact. Between muzzle and 300 meters, it's going to be plus or minus this, basically the dimension of that CD. In a perfect kind of a vacuum environment where there's no other external inputs on the bullet as it flies through the air. Again, like, the shooter is the biggest variable when it comes to marksmanship, but ballistically, the rifle itself combined with that zero will be plus or minus basically the size of that CD, which I really like that. Versus other zeros that are out there, they could be like plus or minus like the throat to like the belt buckle. That's just a lot of variable that I don't really like. And most of these setups, basically like red dot related setups, I like that 36-yard zero because I would really never try and shoot a red dot related system beyond 300 yards. Like, I guess if I really, really had to, I might, but that would only be if I had 100% positive identification that I would need to do that, which is going to be extremely rare. That's going to be extremely rare even in like a shit hit the fan scenario, like without rule of law. That would be extremely rare that you would have positive identification beyond 300 meters that you would need to use deadly force. So that's a whole nother conversation, but just kind of have that in the back of your mind. That's where magnification is so important. So that's where that ACOG comes into play. That ACOG, I can definitely push that, beyond 300 meters to 400 meters, 500 meters, 600 meters. Then that's kind of like the edge of where I'd be really comfortable using that ACOG. But yeah, magnification is very important when it comes to target clarity and definition at distance. So that also brings up the conversation of knowing your holds when it comes to sights and marksmanship. Knowing your holds is very important. So for instance, on this mini ACOG, something that I've learned a long time ago was on that reticle, there's a circle and a dot, and then there's a vertical post underneath it, right? And one thing that I learned in CQB distances, which was basically inside of 7 yards, kind of at that 3 to 5 yard range, and CQB distances, if I put the very bottom of that post where I want to hit, it will be point of aim, point of impact. Like literally I can pick which nostril or which pupil. That's how close that the bottom of that post is. And that has become so important to me that I actually, I wrote Trigicon a while back, and I asked them if I could have my scope sent back to have the bottom of that post have that kind of custom illuminated to light up at the bottom of that post too. And they denied my request, unfortunately, but maybe if this video goes viral, they'll change their minds. I would love to have a TA-44 mini ACOG with the circle, basically with a circle dot, and then basically another dot underneath it that is basically your bad breath distance CQB reticle. That would be like the perfect reticle as far as I'm concerned for the TA-44. So again, knowing your holds is very important. So that 36 meter zero or 36 yard zero, that is a great zero to where like you have to pay attention to your holds a little bit less. But something that is important to understand is the trajectory piece of that. Essentially, the bullet is coming up and it crosses your plane of vision first at 36 yards. And then between 36 yards and 300 yards, the bullet is somewhere above your aiming line. And then the bullet's going to come down again and cross that aiming plane again at 300 yards. Savvy? So, especially when shooting at like 100 yards, it's important to understand that for this system and the way that I shoot, I need to understand that I actually need to shoot low. I actually, to get good, like let's say if I needed to like get a headshot at 100 yards, I'll need to actually aim pretty much kind of at the clavicle line to get like right in the credit card. So that's kind of how important those holds are. So if I were to aim, you know, under stress, if I were to aim like right at the head, if I needed to make a critical headshot at 100 yards, I might graze the top of their head. And you know, if that shot really mattered, if that shot would save someone's life, if I were to make that shot, like I just screwed the pooch. You know what I mean? I missed my shot. So it's important to understand your holds at a very fundamental, almost like a muscle memory, like almost like a visual muscle memory level. That's how much it's important to train with these implements, understand your holds to be able to get it right. Next thing is breathing. There are two things to understand with breathing. First thing to understand is that you have a natural respiratory pause. So essentially when you exhale all of your breath, at the bottom of that breath, that is a respiratory pause. That is what a lot of precision shooters will advocate for. What people used to do is they used to take a deep breath and hold it, and then they'd shoot because that is a respiratory pause. The reality is that both are true because your breathing rhythm is much like a sine wave in electronics. You have peaks and you have valleys. Both the peaks and the valleys are natural respiratory pauses that can be utilized to create an environment for the best marksmanship possible. You can utilize both, it doesn't matter, because you don't necessarily always have time to be like, blow out all that breath and then you shoot. You don't necessarily have time for that. You might have time for, you know what I mean? Taking a quick breath and rip it. It just kind of depends on where you are in your breathing rhythm in that environment. But the other thing that I'll say, I said there was two things, thing one and thing two. Thing one is that you have respiratory pauses and your natural breathing rhythm has two respiratory pauses that you can utilize, both peaks and valleys. The thing two about that conversation is that in a fight, you don't necessarily have time to utilize a respiratory pause. There's been many times where I've had to make a precision shot on the move. Like I need to accurately get hits while I'm moving. So what is important in that environment is just remember to breathe. all right? Just remember to breathe. Because if you're just holding your breath while moving with a rifle and you're focused on other things, the chances of you passing out is pretty good. So just remember to breathe. Don't have labored breathing like hyperventilating or anything like that. Just as much as possible, try to maintain a natural breathing cadence while you are doing said activity. There may be spikes where you need to, let's say, like beat feet and get to a piece of cover, whatever. That's fine. Just remember to breathe while you're doing it. And when you have when you get to a piece of cover, it's important to try and collect that breathing as much as possible, because when your breathing is labored, your body is going through physiological alarm responses, and it makes marksmanship more difficult when you have those elevated respiratory rate, elevated pulse, etc. Those body alarm responses make marksmanship a little bit more difficult. I can say that from very, very close experience being a tactical games competitor. It matters, all right? The next thing that I'll talk about is trigger or trigger manipulation. Most rifles are going to have a two-stage trigger. Some rifles have a single-stage trigger. What I will say on that topic is, if you're unfamiliar with single-stage or two-stage trigger, I would advocate you go look that up and understand. I don't really want to dig into it too deep here, but just understand that your trigger is going to do certain things. Now, it's very important when you are ready to make your shot, you have your reticle centered on where you need to shoot, whether that be directly on or whether you need to do some sort of hold. You need to squeeze the trigger firmly and deliberately all the way to the rear, just all the way through. And it's going to go click and bang. So I have snap caps in this particular rifle, so I'm going to demonstrate what that looks like. So I have my aiming point and I'm ready to fire, so I'm going to flip the rifle into fire, and I'm going to slowly and deliberately squeeze the trigger all the way through the shot. Click. Now when that happens, the rifle is going to cycle just like that. The rifle is going to cycle by itself, and what I need to do is I need to keep that trigger squeezed all the way through that shot, because if I need to make another shot, I'm going to slowly release the trigger. Release, release, release. Click. Now just to that click, no further. I still have firm pressure on the trigger in case I need to squeeze, 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 surprise, and fire again. And again, the rifle cycles, such is life. So that right there is called trigger reset. Trigger reset is probably one of the most important facets of having good rifle marksmanship, simply because if I were to just release the trigger all the way and then come back to the trigger, what that does is it creates a lot of inconsistency. Having constant tension in my trigger finger removes some of that inconsistency, and it keeps the extra slack in that rifle compressed. So when I need to squeeze that trigger to shoot again, I'm already at what you would call the wall. The wall on this two-stage trigger is essentially that second point of pressure. So you have your first point of pressure when you squeeze the trigger through and there's some mush and some slop. Eventually that slop, that stops, and you feel kind of like a hard ledge or a wall that you can feel it with your trigger finger. And that is literally the point of no return when that bullet's about to go, all right? So that's what is so important about mastering that trigger manipulation, because that does two big things. Number one, it gives you the best marksmanship that you can get out of a rifle by having good trigger manipulation, having slow and deliberate and constant pressure on the trigger to squeeze it all the way, not just to the shot, but through the shot. But what that also does is it sets up your trigger finger muscle memory in a position to where if you need to shoot quickly, you can do that. Like bam, 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 bam. Just because basically it's squeeze, release, click, squeeze, release, click, squeeze, release, click, squeeze, release, click. You're not just like slapping the trigger. That's going to give you, that squeeze, release, click, that's going to give you the most consistent marksmanship within successive shots, like bam, 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 bam. Like if I need to like do a couple of shots as something's moving to take it down. So that's all I'm going to talk about with marksmanship.